Cedar Fort Publishing and Media podcast Behind the Scenes, we have Rebekah Pitts, author of 250 Fascinating Facts About Latter-day Saints. It's a fun book that the whole family can read. Welcome, Rebekah. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Great. No, thank you for joining us. Okay, so tell us what your book is about.
So my book is a fact book with random facts about Latter-day Saints. I researched all kinds of different topics, from facts about prophets and general authorities to regular people, the Relief Society, missionaries, anything and everything that had anything to do with Latter-day Saints was fair game.
Awesome. So I read your book. It's really fun. There was a lot of facts that I had never heard before. So I would love to go through some of those facts today and expound on them a little bit. What's your favorite fact out of your books?
Oh, that's just impossible to answer my favorite fact. I can't answer what my favorite fact is because it changes all the time. But my favorite type of fact is any of the ones that involved math.
Okay, so you told me this beforehand, and I was really intrigued by this. Okay, so explain how this works.
Okay, so when I was writing the book, a lot of it was just simple research where I was trying to find out interesting information and finding a fun way to share it. But I also wanted there to be a little bit of me in the book. And so some of the things I did was, as I would research, I would think about what's a fun way that I can make this interesting to the people who read it. And I would often use math to make it interesting. For example, how many stacks or how many Book of Mormons would it take to reach the moon?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that type of thing. And that fact actually was one. I teach piano lessons to my sister's children, and my nephew was really interested in my book. And every week when I would come to teach him, he would try to give me new facts.
Oh, really?
And he really wanted one of them to get in the book. So he brought up this Book of Mormon, copies of the Book of Mormon fact, and we did the math together on how thick are they? Are we using a paperback or a hardback? And I was really careful with the math on that. And I just enjoyed it because I knew that that was an original fact that nobody would read anywhere else because I had thought of it.
Mm-hmm. So what did it end up being? Because it is in the book about the Book of Mormons to the moon. So is it hardback or paperback books?
They are hardback.
Okay, awesome. So something happened to you while you were writing the book. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so while I was writing this book, I had just finished writing another book. It's about LDS temples, and that one was being printed. And the second book was being edited at the time, and during that time, the prophet came out and made an announcement that he would like us to all use the proper name of our church. Mm-hmm. And I instantly was worried about both my first book, because it has the word LDS in the title, mm-hmm. which had always been appropriate to use, and it couldn't be changed. And the second book, where I had used the word Mormon or Mormons or LDS liberally, because it's a fact book. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to have everything be as concise as possible, and who is going to say the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints
on every page,
on every page in a fact book that's little. So that was a little bit hard for me at first, and then I was, of course, being very selfish, and I started to think about the importance of this name clarification. And at the same time, I was trying to write an article to submit to LDS Living. And I'd been writing this article for 6 months. I was writing the article since my first book came out, and I was terrified to submit it and to finish it, and I couldn't finish it. Every time I would sit down to write, I just had nothing else. I couldn't finish the article. And finally, one day, I realized that I was having a stupor of thought. Mm-hmm. And every time I realize I'm having a stupor of thought, I think, I'm so stupid. When am I going to start realizing I'm having a stupor of thought? But I realized it was a stupor of thought, and that I hadn't asked Heavenly Father what he wanted me to write about. The article was initially about temples for my first book. And so I asked him. And he answered me right away. And he said, I want you to write about our name clarification. And then it came very easily to me, and I wrote this article about the difference between using nicknames and real names, mm-hmm. and how important it is that we use real names so that people know who we represent, who we're named after. And that was a really important lesson for me, to realize that in my writing, that I need the Spirit. When I'm writing about spiritual things, I need the Spirit. And also just how important the name clarification is. Mm-hmm. It was hard to change. I think it's been hard for everyone to change. I identified as a Mormon. Mm-hmm. And it was a very comfortable buffer. to identify as Mormon because there was a lot of culture included in that identification, and maybe not as much identifying as a follower of Christ instantly when I would say who I was. And removing that buffer was uncomfortable, but now that it's gone, I feel like everybody knows that we follow Christ. And so I was just grateful to get to have that experience.
Wow, that's a really good insight. I hadn't thought about that before in that depth. I just kind of took it and did my best with it.
It's still a little bit hard.
It is. And I've had some struggles with it here as well, because it is a mouthful. You said there was something interesting about the hair and the china in the walls of the Kirkland Temple. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so that's actually a really fun story. When I was writing, I quickly realized that I needed to include myths because there's a lot of information out there that isn't true. Sometimes I would have a fact that I'd researched, and the more I researched, I found out that it needed to go in the myth section.
Really?
And I moved a couple from being a fact, and I rewrote them to be a myth. So the Kirtland Temple, this was, for me growing up, a faith-promoting story that the Kirtland Temple had crushed porcelain in the walls, and that the pioneers had crushed up their fine china and donated it for the walls of the temple.
I've heard that so many times.
So many times, so that it would sparkle.
Yeah, and then it sparkled in the sunlight.
And then a lesser-known myth was that the pioneer women had cut their hair and donated that, and that was mixed in as a strengthening agent. So the hair, there is hair in the plaster of the temple, but it's horse hair, which makes more sense than the women cutting their hair. And there are dishes in the temple, but they're broken pottery. And this myth was really hard for me when I found out it wasn't true, and I did a lot of research. And one of the reasons why we think it's true is because it was taught to us at church. It was, shared, and it was later found out to be not true. And it was actually really upsetting to me. And this was the topic for the article I was trying to write. Was about these myths. And what I learned from that disenchantment of finding out that there's not this great sacrifice for these walls was that it was okay. It was okay that they didn't do that because they did make enormous sacrifices.
Huge, yeah. Much bigger than that.
Huge.
Yeah.
And the sacrifices through the ages have been huge. And it's okay that that one little thing wasn't true.
So interesting. That is so crazy. I remember the first time I heard that as a little girl in primary from my primary teacher. And we're probably roughly the same age, so we probably heard it around the same time. That's probably like around the time it started.
It was. And what I forgot to mention was I taught it to primary children when I was in my early 20s. We were doing a primary activity about temples, and I had two little boys, and I said, we have to tell this story. This will strengthen their testimonies. And I ordered a cookie cutter online, and this was back when all we had was like eBay and chat rooms. So it was really hard to find, and it looked like a little church, so it looked like the temple. And I made a gazillion sugar cookies, and I bought edible glitter, and I brought it to the activity and let the kids decorate these cookies and sprinkle edible glitter on to look like, sparkly walls. And I told them the story, and I thought, I've done a good thing here.
Yeah.
And then I found out, 15, 20 years later that I had not told those children the truth. And I'm sorry, all the children from Baltimore in 2001. I'm sorry.
I'm sure they'll forgive you. Okay, let's talk about the myth that Latter-day Saints have horns and where that came from.
Okay, so the myth about the horns probably started when the KKK were threatening one of the apostles, J. Golden Kimball. And he was a really funny guy. He was very spunky. He also had a swearing problem. And he told them that all Latter-day Saints have horns and that they would gore them if they attacked them. So I'd never heard this before. And when I started researching the horn myth, I thought, this is so dumb. But the truth is, I have been asked if I have horns.
Really?
Yes.
Because you lived back east.
I lived back east, but this was actually in Texas.
Okay. Yeah, and that's where it comes from, is the South, isn't it, with the KKK?
Yeah.
Interesting. And do you know around what time this was?
I don't know
we can look up when he was alive.
Exactly. A long time ago.
Mormons, air quotes, are not Christians. Where does that come about?
That really comes about from Christians. People who are Christians. I once had a lengthy debate with my cousin who is a Christian about how I'm not a Christian. And they are taught in their churches that the definition of Christian has to really tightly align with some doctrine. And some of the things that we believe that exclude us from that are things such as Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ are two separate people.
And the Holy Ghost all being
and the Holy
separate.
Ghost. And the idea that, other Christian religions usually believe that we are saved by grace and that our works are irrelevant. And we have some doctrine that is pretty important pertaining to our works mattering.
Right.
But we also believe in grace.
Right.
And so there's some confusion that way. And so many Christian religions are just not willing to look past that, and they believe very strongly that we're not Christians.
Yes. I've also heard that some of them believe that the deity that we call Jesus Christ is actually Satan.
Oh.
Fun.
We'll put that in book 3.
Yeah, you'll have to look into that. That one might be a little bit too
mature
out there for you, but I'll send you some information if I can find it again.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Okay. This sounds hilarious, and I cannot wait to hear about this one. The Bear Lake Monster and Brigham Young.
Okay, I love that one. And
I know that one's funny because when I asked you to tell me what were the ones you wanted to talk about, and then before I got your list back, I had sent you my list, and it was on both of them.
I love that one. When I was writing this, my mom was helping me to edit and making suggestions. It was free labor from my mother, and she was really irritated about how I wrote this fact, because I put it in my myth section, and it says, a myth. Brigham Young believed that there was a monster in Bear Lake. And then the fact is, actually, this is true. Because I just thought that would be a really fun way to present it, because who would believe that Brigham Young would believe in a monster in the lake? But what happened was, when the pioneers came to the Salt Lake area, the Native Americans who were already there told them that there was a monster in Bear Lake, and they described it in great detail. And this wasn't a one-time thing. They'd seen something there, and George Q. Cannon actually thought that he saw it. So there was a lot of stuff going on, sightings, kind of like the Loch Ness Monster. So Brigham Young was asked if he would loan a rope. He had a 300-foot long rope, and he loaned that for someone to make a trap out of, which didn't work. They've never caught the Bear Lake Monster, but they put mutton on the end of the rope, and it was gone.
Okay. I don't suppose it had anything to do with the fish in the lake, but...
Oh, it was definitely a monster.
Okay. Well, do you know how they described the monster?
So, from a picture that someone drew of the Bear Lake Monster, it looks kind of like a whale with a monster face, like an alligator /
really?
dinosaur.
Okay.
It's got jagged spikes on its back and lots of flippers, and then big spikes on its tail. And in this depiction, it has recently eaten something that used to be alive.
What kind of whale?
I would say a big whale, like a
great whale?
Yeah. It looks really big.
Interesting.
Maybe there's a whale in the lake.
That would be so awesome. I'm going to go take a vacation up there and find out for myself.
We were just there this summer. I didn't see anything. We'll have to go back and check again.
It's been a long time, though. It might be dead.
That's true.
It might be dead. Okay, now let's talk about, this is another one that I've always heard about, the empty spaces in the Salt Lake Temple. Right? Where Joseph Smith was inspired. No. Who was inspired? Brigham Young was inspired to put them there, but he didn't know why.
Right. Yeah, this is a great one. This is one that I didn't hear growing up because I'm from Texas. But I think a lot of people who grew up in Utah heard this myth. And so again, when I started writing my book, I asked friends and family for ideas, things that they wanted to hear about. This one's in the Temple book, and I won't tell you who, but several people that might be related to me told me this story about these empty places, empty shafts in the Salt Lake Temple, and that they were left there empty by revelation, and later were used for elevators. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And so I researched, and it's just completely false.
Really?
There are elevators in the Salt Lake Temple.
I've been in them.
Yes. But what actually happened was, when the Salt Lake Temple was first designed, there were not elevators readily available across the world, although the concept had existed for quite a while.
That's what I wondered.
Especially in Europe. So as the temple was being constructed, the architect of the temple was Truman O. Angell, and he went to Europe to learn about architecture there, and he would have been exposed to the concept of elevators there. When he came back, he shared things that he'd learned, and what's really pertinent is that the outside of the Salt Lake Temple was built first.
Right.
And remember, it took 40 years to finish the temple, and over time they decided on the inside design.
That makes sense.
By the time that they started the temple, the company that ended up putting the elevators in the temple was founded the year the temple started.
Okay.
So many, many, many years later, this company that had been around for decades already at this point ended up installing elevators. And this is just an example of Heavenly Father doesn't need to give visions or prophecy about things that already exist.
So in a way, it is a little bit true, because they knew that they would possibly be putting them in eventually.
They planned ahead.
But it wasn't exactly like this unknown
variable. Why are we making this void in this building? That's not what happened.
Why do we need these giant shafts?
So it was planned ahead. They knew they existed, and just total debunk of that myth. Not true.
Okay. All right. And what about, do you want to talk about polygamy and horns?
So I want to talk about polygamy. We already talked about horns.
Oh, okay. Oh, those are not the same subject.
Those are different.
Okay.
I could make something up about polygamy and horns.
Okay, let's talk about polygamy then.
Just briefly, that's another myth I chose to put in there. And when I was writing this, I had in mind that maybe some people who are not of my faith might pick up this book and read it. And what would I want the chance to say to them? That we are Christians. Hey, we don't have horns, and that's silly, but I think really important if they think we have horns to dispel that. And polygamy, that how many times have you been asked if we practice polygamy? Have you ever?
Gosh, I actually have to think about that. Maybe a few. None that I can specifically remember. I'm from Southern California, and I don't think that was a well-known fact then in the 90s, actually.
I'm thinking maybe in Texas, those Baptists, they didn't like us. And so people would ask, how many moms do you have?
Yeah.
And even in law school, when we were in Maryland, my husband was asked, how many wives do you have?
And what I found so interesting was you said that has been gone for 150 years, right? And it is still there. Still a thing. It's so interesting.
I blame Satan.
Yeah. It's always his fault.
Pretty much everything's his fault.
Pretty much. Literally. Okay. All right. Okay, here are the things that I want to talk about now. The general conference that lasted for 3 days.
Yeah, that sounds terrible, doesn't it?
I mean, actually, ours kind of do last for 3 days.
That's
now.
True.
Because you have your women's conference or the elders one, and then you have the 2 days. But it's not for 3 days straight. So what happened?
Right. So this one's a little bit of a trick fact, too, just because it was a fact book, I couldn't share all the information, so I had to pick something, and this was true. And the fact is that President Young asked the speakers at General Conference in 1867 to keep their talks short, and it lasted for 3 days. And that's just really funny to us today, because if we were asked to keep our talks short, the meeting would be
super short.
It would be shorter. All right, we're out of here. But back in the day, when the church was first started, conference happened whenever they wanted one. So it wasn't twice a year, and it actually was really common for it to last for a long time. And one of the reasons for that is that they did other things at conference that we don't do now. They served the sacrament. They settled
which
disputes.
is also another fact in your book, isn't it? That they did that until it took too long,
right?
And then they said no more.
So that's one of the math facts in there that I did the math on. How long would it take to serve the sacrament in the conference center with, I think, 12 deacons? And it was a ridiculous amount of time.
Yeah.
And the editor wrote me back and said, I thought you were wrong. I had to check your math on that one. Anyway, so they would serve the sacrament. Of course, it was far fewer people back then. They would have church court.
Oh, interesting.
That would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? And people could actually be excommunicated as part of that conference. They would settle disputes between people. Also awkward. Maybe we should bring that one back. It could be really just in sacrament meeting. Really interesting. And they would extend mission calls right from the pulpit.
Oh, interesting.
So you could go to conference and find out you had to leave and go on a mission. And in addition to that, the speakers didn't have a time frame for how long they were asked to speak. So this is why it would last for 3 days. But this particular time, he was hoping it could be shorter, and it didn't work out. And after a while of it going like this, they took a vote and decided to make conference 4 days long.
Really?
Which didn't last for too long. In 1977, which is the year I was born, they made conference officially only 2 days long.
Okay. And
Hallelujah.
so, yes, hallelujah. So I imagine when they put it at 4 days, they were thinking maybe they could spread it out so that they wouldn't have to be sitting there for so long, maybe.
Yeah.
And at that time, the church was spreading out everywhere. So I bet a lot of people had to travel pretty far.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as easy to travel. So.
And they would be holding these in the tabernacle.
Mm-hmm.
And those seats are really uncomfortable.
They
and
are.
They're for really short little people.
Right. They are. They're incredibly small. Oh, thank goodness we have the conference center now. Or pajama church,
right?
As my family likes to call it. One of our favorite weekends of the year.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing.
Okay. And then tell me about the man, and I'm assuming he is a member
Yes.
of the church, who rowed across the ocean.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a disclaimer at the beginning of the book that every person in the book, I'll actually just find it here, every person mentioned in the book is a Latter-day Saint with a few exceptions. And the exceptions are Cyrus E. Dallin, Elvis Presley, President Benson's chauffeur, the American media, the Baptist Church, guerrillas, the ancient Egyptians, the Native Americans, and 80% of the Pony Express riders. So everyone else is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So there was a man named Richard Jones, and this was in 2001, and he built a rowing rowboat that he rowed himself, and he rowed it across the Atlantic Ocean. It was 3,675 miles, and it took him 133 days, and he was the oldest person to ever do that and the first grandfather.
Wow.
I think a little crazy.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how you could bring enough supplies for that long. Was it just dumb luck that he survived that?
I think he actually brought all the supplies.
Wow.
So this, don't picture a traditional rowboat.
Mm-hmm.
This would be a deluxe yacht version. It was small, but it was maybe, I think, 20 or 30 feet long. And he was able to make his own water. And what I actually found out that was interesting was 3 years before this successful attempt, he tried to do this.
Really?
When he was...
And was he going from America? You said the Atlantic Ocean. So was he going from the East Coast to which country over there?
That is a really good question.
We don't know. Okay.
I have many talents, and geography is not one of them. But you all can look that up and find out. But what I do know is that on his first attempt, he stopped. Everything was going okay, and he stopped because he had a prompting. He had a spiritual prompting that said, "You are done."
Oh, wow.
And he was like, "What? You are done. You are done. You need to go back." So he turned around and he called for help and he quit and he went back. And he found out later that his desalinator, which is what you use to turn salt water into drinking water, was broken.
Oh, wow.
And he didn't know.
So he wouldn't have made it. And I assume because he had that, he really didn't have a water supply, did he?
Exactly.
So he wouldn't have made it.
Yeah, he also, this is why I just call him crazy. He biked across America, and I do know the answer for this, that he started with his back wheel in the Pacific Ocean, and he ended with his front wheel in the Atlantic Ocean, and it took 3 years.
Wow.
And he had a wife. I think still.
Still after all of this, he still had a wife?
Yeah.
Well, bless her heart.
So that's Richard Jones.
Okay, Richard Jones, very, very interesting gentleman. Okay, tell me about the missions, the people who were called to serve missions mining gold.
Yeah, that sounds fun, right?
Yeah. And this is of a particular interest to me because I am from Southern California.
Right.
So part of our social studies growing up as a kid is learning about the gold rush and everything.
So you might know more about it than I do.
Probably not.
we learned about the gold rush in Texas too, but we never heard anything about Mormon missionaries. So as I was researching, I found out that there were a lot of different types of missions people could be called on, and one of them was to mine gold. And these were missions that were created by Brigham Young, and he authorized 6 gold mining missions that were in Utah and California. The reason he did it was to make money for the church. So there was no proselyting involved in these missions, and they were kept secret from the general membership of the church. They didn't know it was happening. The reason for that was because he thought that the allure of gold mining was really dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually said, "The man who is faithful to his calling and to this holy priesthood never goes hunting for gold or silver unless he is sent."
Interesting.
By Brigham Young.
And he was not wrong. The
He was
gold
not.
rush was a big thing, and a lot of people died.
Starved.
And and not very many got rich.
That's true.
Not very many got rich.
So one of the people he sent was George Q. Cannon, who was an apostle, and he was really angry about it.
Really?
He hated the gold mining mission, and he said that he would rather do anything else. This is a direct quote from him. "I heartily despised the work of digging gold. I thought it very poor business for men to be running over the country for gold. I was quite young then, and though nearly 20 years have elapsed since that time, I still think so. There is no honorable occupation that I would not rather follow than hunting and digging gold."
And is this fact in your book, that Sutter's Mill, where the gold rush all started, the man who found it was a Mormon? Did
That
you know
fact
that?
is not in my book.
Well, put it in the next one, because that is a fact.
That is good. One of the fun things I've done is I write bonus facts in my books. When my friends bring them over for signing, I write an extra special fact.
Well, double check my
Yeah, I will have to double check that.
my memory on that one. That was like 3rd grade social studies, so just double check that. But I am pretty sure that that's true.
That's cool.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so you talk about Wilford Woodruff and how what happened to him. He got attacked or something 3 times on the way to a baptism or something like that.
On the way to his baptism.
Okay, and then
he had some trouble.
But that wasn't all.
No. So we know accident-prone people,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes I'm accident-prone. But Wilford Woodruff takes the cake for almost dying a lot. And obviously he had angels. He had heavenly protection because he was supposed to become a prophet.
Mm-hmm.
So he claimed personally that he had his life saved 27 times.
Wow.
And I just have a few of them to share with you today. I didn't want to share all 27. So just starting from when he was 3, he fell in a cauldron of boiling water.
Wow.
And took 9 months to recover.
Wow.
Yeah, that sounds really terrible. When he was 5, he some of these things he brought on himself a little bit.
I was going to ask that.
He was on a beam in the barn, so maybe he shouldn't have been there.
Right.
So that would be up high, and he fell off of that face first.
Wow.
And was badly hurt. So a lot of these, he didn't escape the consequences, but all of them, he just didn't die. When he was 6, he was chased by a mad bull. I don't know why he was
This
around.
is also just country living also.
Right? But he fell in a hole, so there must have been a really big hole in the ground, and the bull just jumped over the hole and went past, and he wasn't gored by the bull. When he was 8, he was riding in a wagon of hay, and it tipped over, and all the hay landed on him, and he almost suffocated.
Oh, wow.
When he was 9, he climbed trees. I mean, if I were Wilford Woodruff back then, I just would have stayed on the ground. But I guess he knew he was safe. He fell 15 feet off of a tree limb, and they actually thought that he was dead, but he wasn't dead. And then he had a little bit of a break where nothing bad happened for like 3 years. Then when he was 12, he almost drowned in a 30-foot river, and some people found him. They pulled him out and saved him. And that's really dangerous. Most people trapped in a 30-foot river do die. Then the next year, he decided to take a nap in a tree trunk and almost froze to death. And he said many more things happened. So for his baptism, things happened on the way to his baptism, and things happened after his baptism. He was 26 years old.
He's a convert, correct?
Yes.
And so actually all of this happened before he was even a member of the church.
Yeah, he didn't even know why
and
he was so lucky.
I'm just curious. I'm looking up a picture of his actual face because you said he fell on his face and was practically boiled alive.
I think he wore a beard, a full beard.
He did have a beard. He actually, he looks fine. He looks like a perfectly handsome gentleman. So I was just curious. Surgery. I was just curious if his face was all messed up.
Falling off the beam in the barn. And he was lucky. So he was baptized at 26. He was a convert. And right after he was baptized, a horse kicked at his head and hit his hat. But missed his actual head by just a few inches, which normally would really hurt you badly for a horse. I don't know how the horse got it to his head. We should look up how tall he was.
They can do it.
They can do
Trust me, they can do it.
And then, as he continued on his way home, he was in a sleigh, and he was thrown from the sleigh, and he landed between the horses and was dragged for half a mile.
The horse is pulling the sleigh?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So he just kept having things like this happen.
Did it eventually stop?
Eventually, it was just a half a mile.
I mean, did his bad luck eventually stop?
Eventually, he died.
Okay.
A very old man.
Yeah, he did. Oh.
I don't know what kind of bad luck he had in between these instances. I would think that eventually, probably by the time he was about 13, he probably knew that he was special.
I think he deserves his own book, don't you?
I do.
A really intimate book. Get some family journals or something, and
Right.
There's got to be more to this story. That is
It could be
insane.
called A Cautionary Tale.
Yeah, Wilford Woodruff. Oh my gosh, someone really had it out for him.
I also blame Satan for that one.
That's who I was talking about. Okay, this one is crazy. First of all, this is crazy because this did not happen in this day and age. This did not happen. The Relief Society sisters were called to become doctors, correct?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so this type of thing wouldn't be as strange for this day and age if our prophet
But back then it was totally weird.
Totally unheard
No
of.
female doctors, none.
Right, there were no female doctors.
Dr. Quinn, medicine woman, fake.
Fake. Fake.
Sister Cook, medicine woman, real though.
Yes. Yeah, so I found this one to be really fascinating, that we are often accused in our religion of suppressing women and, rude comments like, well, why aren't you barefoot and pregnant in your kitchen?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, sometimes I am.
When I want to be.
For each child, but we actually have a long history of valuing education for women, and this was under Brigham Young as well. He was a prophet for a long time.
Some of one of the first groups of people to allow women to have the vote?
Yes,
was
and
here
that's a
in
fact
Utah.
in the book too. Yeah, Utah was one of 2 first states that fought for women to have the vote. So these doctors, the Relief Society and the church, paid for many of these women to go back east. They left their families, they left children for years before we had easy ways to communicate. They had nothing but letters to communicate with their children. Polygamy was really helpful for that because most of these women were living in a polygamist marriage, so there were other wives.
Right, to take care of their children.
That cared for their children. Exactly. I read an instance of 2 wives, and one went for medical training and she came back, and then the other wife went.
Wow.
And they took turns. So one of them that I thought was interesting, she's someone that people in Utah might be familiar with. Her name was Ellis R. Shipp, and she was one of the first female doctors in Utah who had the church paid for her education, and her husband's other wives took care of her children. And the reason that I've heard of her is because there is a midwifery clinic in Utah named after her. And I didn't realize who she was, but if you go there, there are black and white pictures all over the walls that show these early midwives. She was a doctor, but she trained midwives. So what these women would do is they would go and become doctors and come back and train people to be nurses and midwives.
And why did he, was this during Brigham Young's time?
Yes, Brigham Young.
Why did he choose women to do this? Do you know?
Well, I think because women are better.
No, we're
No, not really.
But
I think he probably chose women to do it because women are naturals at nurturing. It's in our divine nature.
Do you know if any of his wives went?
I don't know. I would love to know that. He had so many.
Yeah,
probably.
He did. I would bet at least one of them.
Probably,
right?
Since he had. There's a lot of argument about how many wives he actually had, but I believe the number to be 55.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Where do you know? Were they all living at the time? Because I know, like with Joseph Smith, a lot of his wives was after he was dead.
After he was dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that Brigham Young was sealed to these women when he was alive, but married to them. There were 3 different distinctions of what type of marriage it was.
Oh, really?
Some of them were your traditional marriage, where they were sealed and married, and he had marital relationships with them. So he had 56 children. And I think that was with about 27 of his wives. Some of them he was sealed to them for eternity and did not have a marital relationship with them. And some of them he was married to them for time, and he cared for their temporal needs. So someone whose husband had died, and again, he did not live with them as husband and wife, but he cared for them.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So that's how you get up to that number 55.
Right. Okay, that is so interesting. I need to look more into that. Yes. Okay, let's talk about the 14-year-old who took her dad and her siblings across the plains herself in a handcart, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
Or
I can tell you for a fact, my 14-year-old is wonderful, but she could not do that.
I'm not sure if it was a handcart or a wagon.
Either way.
But either way, I think it actually was a wagon. I have a 14-year-old, and I remember being a 14-year-old,
right.
And I was very selfish.
Right.
Really thought about myself and could barely manage my own, laundry.
Right.
I love 14-year-olds, but it's a hard time. They're trying to learn who they are. So this young lady was named Mary Wanless, and she was living with her family in Missouri. They'd been living in Missouri for a few years with the Saints and decided to come to Utah. But before they could come to Utah, her father suffered a stroke a few years before when she was about, I think, 8. And her stepmother gave birth to twins about that same time. Mm-hmm. And so the stepmother was caring for the father. And over the course of her caring for him, it was too much for her physically, and she ended up passing away.
Oh, wow.
And
also her birth mother also had passed away.
Right, her birth mother had passed away.
And her stepmother.
Before, so now she's motherless.
Right.
And before her stepmother passed away, she said to Mary, "Don't give your father any peace till he goes to the Rocky Mountains."
Wow.
So she told this to her father, and he sold everything that they owned and bought what they needed to go to Utah. And they left. But about a week after they left, he had another stroke. And at this point became completely bedridden. Mary had, at this time, a 9-year-old brother, a 6-year-old sister, and these 4-year-old twins.
Wow.
And she was caring for everybody. And they are out on the trail. And they waited about a week as he was recovering, I guess, the initial recovery. Mm-hmm. And there were no more wagon trains. They missed the last wagon train. So Mary put the children on the oxen, and they rode the oxen, and her little brother, who was 9, helped to pilot, and she led the family alone to Utah. They actually ended up in Lehi, and I looked it up to see how far would that be. If they could take the freeway that we have today, it would be 1,100 miles.
Wow. Yeah, we have family in Missouri, and it takes them a couple days to drive.
Right, because you don't want to drive 16 hours.
Right. It takes them a couple days to get here from there. I can't even imagine. That's just amazing.
She was an amazing person.
Yeah, she was. And for anybody listening who's, I've had to take care of somebody who had a stroke before. And there's varying degrees of what happens to you. But if he was completely unable to take care of himself, you have to do everything. Help them with bathroom, food. Some of them can't talk. So.
And this was before modern plumbing.
Right.
She was helping him on the trail.
Yeah, I have to wonder, how did she help him get up and down and that sort of thing, get in and out of the wagon?
Wow, what an amazing story of faith.
Yes, truly. She deserves her own book.
She does. So many books to write.
You have books to write for years. Okay, this one, Dieter Uchtdorf, who is still alive and well with us. Apparently, he stopped a hijacking.
Yeah.
As if he's not already cool enough.
Every story about Dieter Uchtdorf has to have an airplane, right? All his stories. So Dieter Uchtdorf, there are so many fascinating stories. I have several facts about him in the book because he just had so many great stories, and about his wife as well. So he, as you all probably know, was a pilot. He lived in Germany, so he was the chief pilot for Lufthansa airline. And in 1973, he was 33 years old. And some guerrillas, which basically means terrorists, hijacked a 737 airplane that was in Rome. They actually killed a bunch of people as part of the hijacking right at the beginning, and then they were heading towards Greece with the airplane. The president of the company was, of course, in charge of dealing with the situation, and he sent Dieter F. Uchtdorf with some other people on another airplane, and they pursued this airplane. And as they were all flying, there were negotiations. He was involved in it. Other people were involved in the negotiations, and eventually convinced them to land, and they were given permission to land in Kuwait. And after that happened, Dieter picked up the other airplane, and he flew that back to Germany.
He got off and flew that one back. Wow.
Yeah. He was just doing his job.
Yeah. Wow. That's such an interesting story. And this was in 1973?
Yeah.
Wow. So not too long ago. That is
Depending on how
crazy.
old you are.
Yeah, that's true.
Just a few years ago.
It was before I was born.
Me too.
But I still don't consider it that long ago. Certainly wasn't like 100 years ago.
Modern times.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today. This was so much fun. We are definitely going to have you back because this is just...
Thank you for having me.
This is ear candy for me. And we got to go through your other book, too, the 250 Fascinating Facts About LDS Temples as well. So if you guys are interested in these books, you can find them at cedarfort.com, Amazon.com, I'm assuming, Deseret Book, and Siegel Book. Anywhere else you can think of?
If you like to shop online, you have so many choices.
Right.
I've seen them at walmart.com, target.com, barnesandnobles.com.
Yeah, pretty much anywhere books are sold online, you can get them. But yours are actually in the bookstores at Siegel and Deseret. And if people want to follow you, can you give us your social media so they can keep track of you?
So if you want to follow me, you can follow me on Facebook, Rebekah Pitts, or on the other one.
Listen, we got Facebook, Instagram.
I'm not very active on Instagram, but I'm very active on Facebook. And you can also look up my website, www.rebekahpitts.com.
Okay.
A word to the wise. My name is spelled Rebekah the Bible Way.
With a K.
With a K-A-H. So if you've ever read the Bible, maybe read it again. Genesis. It's in Genesis. You'll have to spell it that way.
And that's your Twitter handle as well, as Rebekah Pitts?
I am not on Twitter.
Oh. Instagram is what I meant. That's your Instagram?
Yes.
Okay, and no Twitter. All right, awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are done. That seriously was so fun.
Oh, thank you.